The St. Louis terminus was not a place of comfort. It was a beast of iron and steam. It was a monument to progress and a swirling vortex of chaos, a place where the air hung thick with the sharp, acidic scent of coal smoke and the metallic taste of fine dust. Under the vast, grimy glass roof, thousands of souls swirled in a chaotic symphony of departure, each one a story, a hope, or a regret, all pressing forward. Among them, but not of them, stood Eliza Grafton. She was a ghost at the crossroads, her small, worn valise clutched in one hand, her ticket to the far west gripped in the other. She was fleeing. She was fleeing the whispers of her hometown, the knowing, pitying glances, the pointed fingers, and the suffocating heartbreak of a future that had crumbled into dust. Her practical plan was to find quiet anonymity as a seamstress, a trade at which she was skilled. She would disappear into the raw new territories, and her past would, she prayed, disappear with her. But this practical plan was a thin blanket over a freezing soul. Inside, Eliza was empty. She felt in her darkest moments like a hollowed-out gourd, dry, brittle, and rattling with the seeds of what might have been. The world around her was a cacophony of life, but she was silent, her own life having stalled. As she stood there, buffeted by the crowd, she had offered up a desperate, unspoken prayer. It was not a prayer for wealth or even for happiness. It was a prayer for purpose. She had prayed to God for something or someone to care for, a reason to be more than just a shadow fleeing her own past. Her eyes, clouded with a weariness that went far beyond her journey, drifted across the platform. She was looking for nothing in particular, just a place to rest her gaze. And that is when she saw him. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, but he seemed to be held up only by the force of his own will. His face was etched with a profound weariness, a deep, abiding sadness that she recognized, for it mirrored her own. He was not alone. Hiding behind his legs, clinging to his worn trousers, were two small children, a boy and a girl, their eyes wide with the terror of the overwhelming noise and confusion. Welcome, friends, to Frontier Rescue Stories. Before we discover who this mysterious man is, and whether Eliza can truly escape the shadows of her past, help us bring more stories of love, survival, and redemption to the world. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs a little hope. Your support helps us reach a larger audience, and it truly means the world to us. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these frontier stories travel. Now, let's begin our story. The man's name was Josiah Barron. He was a homesteader from the high plains, a man who understood the language of the earth, of hard work, and of God. He understood the rhythm of the seasons and the weight of a promise. But the chaos of the city was a foreign tongue, a deafening noise that grated on his soul. He had come to St. Louis on what he now believed to be a fool's errand, a desperate last-ditch effort to solve a problem that was, quite simply, breaking him. His wife, Sarah, had been taken by the fever 2 years prior, leaving him with a silence in his heart and two small, precious lives in his hands, their twin children, Samuel and Grace. He was a good father, hard-working and God-fearing, but he was failing. He knew it with the same certainty that he knew the sun would rise. The ranch was too much for one man, the fields too vast, the winters too harsh. And the children. The children needed a mother. They needed a softness he, with his calloused hands and weary heart, could not provide. He could bind their wounds and fill their bellies, but he could not mend the quiet brokenness in their spirits. Samuel, the boy, was energetic and bright, but his natural curiosity had been dulled by loss. It was as if a light had gone out, replaced by a quiet, watchful shyness. Grace, his twin sister, was a gentle, timid soul. She hadn't said more than a handful of words in a month, and she never ever let go of the small handmade doll her mother had sewn for her. It was her last tangible piece of a life she barely remembered. They were 5 years old, and the city, with its roaring engines and faceless crowds, terrified them. Josiah had tried to hire help back home. He had asked the good women of their small church, but no one was willing to take on a widower and 2 small children on a remote ranch. And so, with his fields needing planting and his hope dwindling, he had scraped together his savings and come to the city. He didn't know what he expected to find. Place an ad? Interview an agency? Find a mail-order bride from a catalog? He only knew he was failing his children. He too had been praying for guidance, for a sign, for any kind of divine intervention, and now he had to admit defeat. There was no one. There was no help. He had to take his children home to a future that looked as bleak and barren as a winter sky. It was then that the small disaster struck. A portly businessman, his eyes on the station clock, rushed past, bumping hard into the little family. He grumbled an apology without stopping. Samuel cried out, and Grace, in her fright, dropped her doll. The small calico figure fell to the grimy platform floor. Grace stared at it, her face crumpling, her breath hitching in a silent sob. But she was too frozen with fear to move. Before Josiah could even bend his weary frame, a woman stepped out of the crowd. It was Eliza. She moved with a quiet, unconscious grace, ignoring the soot on the platform as she knelt and picked up the doll. She didn't just grab it. She held it gently, as if it were a living thing. Her fingers, long and nimble, a seamstress's hands, automatically smoothed the doll's tangled yarn hair and straightened its tiny, soiled apron. Then she looked up at Grace. Eliza's face, which moments before had been a mask of hollow despair, was transformed. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, a smile of such profound, inherent kindness that it was like a beam of sunlight in the grimy station. "She's very beautiful," Eliza said, her voice soft, cutting through the din. "She just needs a little dusting off. She's had a fright, I think." She held the doll out to Grace. The little girl hesitated, her large eyes darting from her father to the kind woman. Slowly, her tiny hand reached out and took the doll, clutching it to her chest as if it were an anchor. Josiah stood frozen, watching the entire exchange. He had been praying for a sign. He had been looking for a miracle. He had expected a booming voice from the heavens, or perhaps a timely sermon. He had not expected this. He had not expected the answer to his prayer to be the kindness in a stranger's eyes, or the gentle way her hands had cared for his daughter's most precious possession. In that one small, selfless gesture, he saw the answer to his desperate, impossible prayer. His heart began to pound with a terrifying, reckless, and wholly improper idea. It was madness. It was, perhaps, his only chance. Eliza stood up, gave a small, polite nod to the man, and turned to head toward her own train. The conductor's voice was already bellowing. "Train for the Western Territories, now boarding on track 4. All aboard." "Ma'am." Josiah's voice was rough, cracking with desperation and disuse. Eliza paused and turned, a flicker of polite question in her eyes. He took a step forward, blocking her path. The children, Samuel and Grace, peeked out from behind him, their small faces a mirror of his own desperation. Josiah Barron took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers, knowing that what he was about to say would either save him or damn him completely as a fool. "Ma'am," he began again, the words tumbling out before he could lose his nerve. I beg your pardon. This is not proper. I know this is not proper. My name is Josiah Barron. These are my children, Samuel and Grace, their mother. She passed 2 years ago." Eliza's posture softened. The faint alarm in her eyes was replaced by understanding. She saw the story now, the weary shoulders, the ill-fitting city clothes, the haunted eyes of the children. This was a man at the end of his rope. "I am a homesteader," he continued, his voice low and rushed. "I have a good ranch, a good sturdy house. It's a good life, but it is not a life for children without a mother. I can't do it alone anymore. I am a God-fearing man, ma'am. I promise you that." The conductor's voice boomed again. "Final call. Track 4. All aboard!" "What I saw," Josiah said, his eyes pleading, "the way you looked at my daughter. The kindness. Ma'am, I was in this station praying for guidance, and I believe God sent you." "Sir," Eliza said, her voice gentle. "I don't. Marry me," he whispered, the words hanging in the smoky air between them. Eliza's heart stopped. "Please," he pressed, seeing the shock on her face. "Come home with me. Be a mother to my children. I can't offer you riches. I can't offer you an easy life. But I can offer you a home, a family. I will provide for you. I will honor you. Please." Eliza stood, stunned into silence. This was not a proposal of love. It was a proposal of raw, unvarnished desperation. It was a business transaction for a human heart. Her mind reeled. She had fled her old life to escape being the subject of gossip. And now this man was offering her a new life that began with an act of pure, unadulterated scandal. This was not the purpose she had prayed for. This was madness. She had a plan, a practical plan, a quiet job as a seamstress, anonymity. "Sir," she said, her voice firm, though her hands were shaking, "you are not thinking clearly. You are overcome with grief. You don't know me." She took a step around him, her own train, her own escape, calling to her. I am sorry for your trouble. Truly I am. I wish you and your children well." Eliza did not look back. She could not. To look back would be to invite the chaos of this man's life into her own, and she had just spent her last dollar to escape the chaos of her past. She had done the right thing, the only sensible thing. The man was a stranger, clearly mad with grief. He was not her problem. He was not her purpose. She pushed through the gate, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found her car, her hands trembling as she gave her ticket to the conductor. He tipped his hat and she moved into the narrow corridor. She found her seat, a hard wooden bench by the window, and sank onto it. She had done it. She was safe. Her practical plan was back on track. In a few days she would be in a new town with a new job, and this strange, heartbreaking encounter would be nothing but a bizarre memory. The train gave a great lurch. A puff of steam hissed past her window, obscuring the platform in a momentary white cloud. It was starting to move. With the first screech of the wheels, the cloud of steam cleared. Eliza looked out the window, back at the platform, almost against her will. She was looking for, she didn't know what. And then, through the smoke and the dwindling crowd, she saw them, Josiah and his two small children, walking away. They were heading toward the station's massive exit, a small, defeated unit. Samuel, the little boy, was trying to help his father by carrying a heavy bag, his small shoulders straining. And Grace was just standing still, her head down, clutching her doll. Josiah stopped, his own shoulders slumping with a profound resignation. He turned back, his weariness a physical weight, and bent to scoop his daughter into his arms. Eliza watched the small, defeated family turn toward the exit. She saw the man's weary back, the girl's small head on his shoulder, the boy's hopeless trudge as he followed, and in that moment, the practical plan she had built her future on suddenly felt as hollow as she was. The anonymity she craved now seemed like another word for loneliness. The life of a seamstress, of quiet, empty rooms, of stitching clothes for strangers, stretched out before her, and it felt like a prison. She had prayed for a purpose. She had prayed for someone to care for, and they were walking right out of the station. The train wheels screeched as they began their slow, grinding turn. The platform was already sliding past her window, picking up speed. It was a reckless, faith-filled moment. It was madness. It was perhaps the only real choice she had ever made in her entire life. Eliza's mind went silent. There was no more thought, no more debate between her practical plan and the desperate yearning of her soul. There was only the image of the man and his children, and the sudden, unshakable, terrifying conviction that this was the answer to her prayer. "Stop!" A woman sitting across from her shrieked, as Eliza suddenly grabbed her valise. Eliza didn't hesitate. She didn't apologize. She ran down the narrow aisle of the moving passenger car, her heart in her throat. She fumbled with the heavy door latch, wrenching it open. "Ma'am, you can't!" the conductor shouted, lunging for her, but he was too late. To the gasps of the passengers, Eliza Grafton, the woman who had always done the sensible thing, the woman who had always followed the rules, gathered her skirts and leaped from the moving train. She hit the platform hard, stumbling, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. Her valise flew from her hand, bursting open, scattering its meager contents. A few items of clothing, a brush, a Bible, across the grimy platform. But she didn't feel the pain. She didn't care about her belongings. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the scrapes on her hands, and looked wildly around the platform. She saw them, almost at the great arched exit. "Mr. Barron," she screamed, her voice tearing through the station's din, raw and desperate. "Josiah!" He stopped. He turned, his face a mask of utter, profound disbelief. He saw her, disheveled, breathless, her hair falling from its pins, standing like a madwoman on the platform as her train, her escape, pulled away without her. Eliza limped toward him, her chest heaving, her ankles screaming in protest. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clutching her skirt. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was, for the first time in her life, utterly certain. The station around them seemed to fade away. The only sound was the departing train, the sound of her old life disappearing down the tracks forever. "Yes," she said breathlessly. If the offer is still, yes, I will." Josiah just stared at her. He looked at the departing train, then back at her, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. He slowly, carefully set Grace on her feet. He looked at his children, at their wide, confused eyes. Then he looked back at Eliza, at this impossible woman who had just thrown her entire life away for them. He nodded just once. A silent, solemn contract, a leap of faith met. The immediate aftermath was a blur of chaotic logistics. The station master, a stern man with mutton-chop whiskers, had to be dealt with. He was apoplectic about a woman launching herself from a moving train. Josiah, his emotional reserve back in place like a shield, handled it with a quiet, firm dignity. He spoke of a family misunderstanding. Eliza, her ankle throbbing, sat on a bench, repacking her scattered belongings, her hands still shaking. Grace and Samuel stood beside her, their wide eyes never leaving her face. She was a whirlwind, a stranger who had fallen from the sky. There was no talk of romance. There was the purchase of 3 tickets, not for a train, but for a dusty, bone-rattling stagecoach, and then a hired wagon for the last leg of the journey. And then there was the silence. The journey to Willow Creek Ranch was long, stretching over several days. The chaotic symphony of the city was replaced by the clip-clop of the horses, the rumble of the wagon wheels, and a silence between them that was heavier and more awkward than any noise. Eliza sat on the wagon bench, her heart pounding with the aftershocks of her decision. Josiah sat beside her, his hands firm on the reins, his eyes fixed on the horizon. They were, in effect, strangers. Married by a desperate plea and a reckless leap, Eliza's mind swirled with questions. What have I done? I've run from one set of whispers only to create a bigger scandal. I've married a man I do not know. I'm going to a place I have never seen. But beneath the fear there was a strange, deep calm, a sense of rightness. She had made a choice. She would see it through. Josiah's thoughts were a different kind of storm. I've tied this good, kind woman to my broken life. What right did I have to ask such a thing? God help me be a good husband to her. God help her not to regret this. He was respectful, pointing out landmarks. That's the Missouri River. But his words were clipped, reserved. He was a man afraid to hope. They stopped at a rustic inn. The proprietor, a stout woman, looked at the weary man, the disheveled woman with the limp, and the 2 silent children, and drew her own conclusions. She gave them a room. That night, Eliza saw the true depth of her new purpose. The children were grimy from the road. While Josiah saw to the horses, Eliza gently washed their faces in a basin of cool water. She untangled Grace's hair. Later, as they lay on a pallet, she told them a story, a simple tale her own mother had told her. Samuel listened with rapt attention. Grace, clutching her doll, watched Eliza's mouth, her eyes soft in the lamplight. Josiah stood in the doorway watching, his heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. The next day, the landscape changed. The flat, crowded fields of the east gave way to rolling hills and then to the vast, open prairie. It was a land of breathtaking, terrifying emptiness. It was a land that demanded strength. Finally, as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Josiah pulled the horses to a stop on a high ridge. "We're here," he said, his voice rough. Eliza looked. It wasn't just a farm. It was a small piece of a new world. It was a place of honest work and quiet beauty. In the valley below sat a 2-story white clapboard house with a wide, welcoming porch. A large red barn stood nearby, along with several other outbuildings. Even from a distance she could see a well-tended kitchen garden and a trellis of climbing roses, not yet in bloom. As they drove into the yard, Eliza stepped down from the wagon, her twisted ankle aching. But the pain was secondary. She stood breathing in the air. It was clean. It was real. It didn't smell of coal smoke. It smelled of turned earth hay and the sweet, faint fragrance of climbing roses. Josiah was lifting a sleeping Samuel from the wagon bed. Grace was standing by his leg, clutching her doll, staring at Eliza and then at the house. Josiah cleared his throat. "It's not much. It's beautiful," Eliza said, and she meant it. He led her inside. The house was sturdy, the floor scrubbed clean. But it was empty. It was a shell. The rooms were silent, save for the ticking of a mantel clock. This was her new beginning. A silent man, 2 frightened children, and a white house that desperately needed a woman's touch. She had made her leap. Now she had to find out if she could land. The first few weeks at Willow Creek Ranch were a lesson in quiet survival. The house, Eliza discovered, was as hollow as she had once been. It was scrubbed clean. Josiah was a tidy man, a man of rigid routine, but it was a house without a heart. It was a place of function, not of feeling. The curtains were simple muslin. The furniture was sparse and practical. There were no pictures on the walls, no cushions on the chairs. It was a house where people slept and ate, but did not live. Josiah, true to his nature, was a fortress. His emotional reserve was a wall as high and thick as any on the frontier. He was a man of the land, rising before the sun and working until long after it set. He was respectful always. He had given her the master bedroom, his and Sarah's old room, while he took a small cot in his office downstairs. He provided for her, as promised. He spoke to her about the weather, the livestock, the needs of the ranch. But he did not speak of his late wife. He did not speak of his grief, and he did not ask about her past. They were 2 strangers, living under one roof, bound by a promise. So Eliza turned her attention to the children. She turned her attention to the house. She turned her prayer for purpose into action. Her first attempt at making bread in the old, cantankerous wood-fired stove was a disaster, a rock-hard, smoky brick that Samuel poked with a stick, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disgust. Josiah, seeing it, didn't laugh, but his lips twitched for a half-second. It was the most emotion she had seen from him. The next week her loaf was edible. The week after that, it was perfect. The smell of fresh bread, of cinnamon, of stewing apples began to fill the quiet, hollow house. She found her predecessor's kitchen garden, which was overgrown with weeds but had good bones. She spent hours on her knees, her hands in the turned earth, pulling weeds, turning the soil, planting new seeds. It was hard, honest work, and she felt the hollowness inside her begin to fill with every weed she pulled, with every seed she planted. But her true work was with Samuel and Grace. Grace, the timid, cautious child, still barely spoke, but she would follow Eliza at a distance, a small shadow in a calico dress, watching her hang the laundry, watching her knead the dough. One afternoon, Eliza sat on the wide porch mending one of Josiah's shirts. Grace sat on the bottom step watching, clutching her doll. Eliza noticed the little girl's doll was coming apart, one arm hanging by a single fraying thread. "She looks like she's had a difficult journey," Eliza said softly, not looking directly at the girl. "She's a very brave doll. May I see her?" Grace hesitated for a long minute. This doll was her shield. But then she slowly climbed the steps and handed over the doll. Eliza spent the next hour meticulously mending the doll. She restitched the arm, reinforced its seams, and, using a scrap of blue ribbon from her own meager valise, she fashioned a new, bright bow for its yarn hair. When she handed it back, Grace looked at the doll, then up at Eliza, her small face unreadable. Then she did something extraordinary. She stepped forward and wrapped her tiny arms around Eliza's legs in a brief, fierce hug before running off, doll in hand. It was a victory more profound than any she had ever known. With Samuel, the curious boy, it was the family Bible. He was bright, but he was falling behind. So, every evening after supper, by the light of the kerosene lamp, Eliza would sit with him at the kitchen table and trace the letters. B, C. Josiah would sit in the corner, mending a piece of tack, pretending not to listen. But he was. He was watching this stranger patiently, kindly, bring his son into the world of words. He was watching his hollow house fill with the sound of a woman's voice, the smell of baking bread, and the scent of roses. The thaw did not come all at once. It came in inches. It was Josiah, finding her in the garden, telling her, "The frost comes early in these hills. Best cover the new plants." It was him, leaving a small, clumsy bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table. It was her, handing him a hot cup of coffee when he came in from the fields. Their hands brushing for the first time, a jolt passing between them. The true test, the true frontier rescue, came with the first blizzard. It descended on the plains without warning, a wall of white that trapped them in the white clapboard house for 3 days. The wind howled like a mourning spirit. The first night, they nearly lost a new calf. A snowdrift had blocked the red barn door, and the mother was in distress. Josiah and Eliza worked side by side in the freezing cold, in the heart of the storm, to save it, moving as a team. Their earlier awkwardness burned away by the shared, desperate crisis. That night, huddled by the fireplace, the storm raging outside, the children asleep upstairs, the walls of the house finally felt warm. The silence was no longer empty. It was comfortable. Josiah looked at Eliza, the firelight catching the auburn in her hair. His weary eyes were different. The sadness was still there, but it was joined by something else: respect, admiration, and a warmth that mirrored the fire. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet. You saved the calf." Eliza looked at him, at this man she had married, but was only just beginning to know. "We saved it, Josiah," he nodded. The walls of Willow Creek had finally truly come down. The seasons turned, and the prairie, which had been locked in the hard, unforgiving grip of winter, exploded into a riot of life. A year had passed since Eliza's desperate leap from the train. It was spring again. The climbing roses that Eliza had so carefully tended, the ones that had been just buds on a trellis when she arrived, now cascaded over the wide porch. Their sweet fragrance was a constant, gentle reminder of her new beginning, a promise fulfilled. The house was no longer hollow. It was a home. It was filled with the sound of Samuel's voice, no longer shy and watchful, but clear and strong, reading aloud from a book. It was filled with Grace's laughter. The timid girl who once hid behind her father's legs was now a bright, affectionate child who helped Eliza in the garden and sang songs to her doll. And the silence between Eliza and Josiah was gone, replaced by the easy comfort and deep love and connection of a true marriage. It was a love that hadn't been born of a single fiery glance, but one that had been built slowly, day by day, through shared work, mutual respect, and quiet patience. It was a love forged by blizzards and harvests, by mended dolls and shared glances over the supper table. It was a love that was as sturdy and reliable as the ancient oak tree that grew by the creek. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in the same brilliant, hopeful colors as the day she arrived, Eliza stood on the porch, breathing it all in. Josiah came up behind her, his large hands resting gently on her shoulders. He was no longer the weary, defeated man from the station. His shoulders were still broad, but they were no longer slumped. His eyes, when he looked at her, were filled with a deep, true love. In the yard, near the oak tree, Samuel and Grace were playing, their laughter carrying on the warm, rose-scented air. "Do you ever miss it?" Josiah asked, his voice a low rumble. "The city? The life you were supposed to have?" Eliza leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She thought of the grimy station, the coal smoke, and the hollow woman she had been. She thought of the practical plan that would have led her to a life of quiet anonymity, a life of being alone. "No," she said, her voice full and certain. "I don't miss it. I didn't know it at the time, but I was fleeing the wrong things. I was running from a life I didn't want, instead of running to one I did." Josiah turned her around to face him, his calloused thumb gently brushing her cheek. "You were the answer to my prayer, Eliza," he said. Eliza smiled, placing her hand on his chest. "And you," she said, looking past him to the children he had given her to love. "You and Samuel and Grace. You were the answer to mine." She had prayed for a purpose. She had been given a family. She had prayed for someone to care for, and she had been given a life filled with love. Her second chance had been found not in the safety of her plan, but in the most reckless, faith-filled moment of her life. The woman who had leaped from a train found that she had not been falling at all. She had been caught. And so the woman who leaped from a train found that she hadn't fallen at all. She had been caught. Thank you for joining us for this story on Frontier Rescue Stories. If you were moved by Eliza and Josiah's journey of faith, please show your support by giving this video a like, sharing it with friends or family, and subscribing to the channel so you never miss a tale of survival and redemption. We have a whole playlist of stories just like this one, filled with courage, hope, and the strength of the human spirit. We invite you to check them out. What did you think of Eliza's incredible leap of faith? Was it madness or the bravest decision she ever made? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you, and we read your suggestions for future stories. From all of us here, we wish you warmth, hope, and courage. Goodbye for now.